Hey, man. Well, welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Full disclosure to everybody listening to me, you might see the family resemblance. This is my younger brother. It's very exciting. So, how's it going, man?
Good.
Yeah?
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Well, I am excited to learn more about Turtle Wines. And so the first thing I got to ask you is there's an exciting name behind Turtle. Where'd the name come from?
Sure. Dad named it for me. Before he passed away, and so he just called me out of the blue one day. Well, I'm screwing up the story already.
Sorry, dude.
He used to take us diving, as you know, and on one particular dive, I almost ran into a turtle underwater.
Yeah, big no-no in Hawaii. You can't touch them.
You're not supposed to, yeah. And we were just looking the wrong direction, and all of a sudden we were very close. He was the only thing in my goggles.
Yeah.
And, we swam away real fast. But, of course, Dad just liked telling that story as like a fatherly story. And so one day he calls me up out of the blue and he says, I know what you ought to name your winery. Haven't even started a winery at this point. He's just like, I know what you got to name your winery. Turtle. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like Turtle Winery? That's pretty... No. Just Turtle. I was like, okay. So after he passed, I just thought it'd be fun way to honor him.
Yeah, that's you got a quote from him on the back one of your reserve bottle.
Yeah, so back labels, some people they're kind of important, but just for the fun of it, I thought like, man, how many people are really going to read it? So let's just put a dad quote on there.
Yeah, I like it. Well, you have to buy the wine to find the quote. So
sure, yeah. I guess I won't leak it, which I was totally not about to do.
And tell me a little bit about the logo. I love it. The goofy little turtle. You had Bob Smith paint that, right?
Yeah, Grandma's best friend up in McPherson, Kansas. Happens to be an artist, and so we reached out to him. Especially with our intro budget of $0, he was kind enough to supply us with the logo, and it turned out really sharp. We've gotten quite a few compliments. I'm really excited about it.
He's kind of a, mildly famous artist. I don't know if he's like in the museums yet, but he's pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know what it takes to be called a famous artist, but I would say he is one. Yeah,
I think dying makes you.
Is that what it is?
You just kind of live along with your deal, and then you die, and people are like, "Oh, now we appreciate it." Yeah. Well, you have very excitingly and somewhat nerve-wrackingly for me sometimes worked all over the world. I've had to deal with the phone calls from Mom when she can't get a hold of you while you're across the dang planet.
That is correct.
So tell us a few of the different places you worked. New Zealand, Australia. Did you ever work in Europe or?
No, I never got to work in Europe. I really wanted to work in France, and I applied for a bunch of places, and they were like, "You really got to know French." And I was like, I can sometimes read parts of it. Yeah. So I never got that cool French job. But I did get to work with a lot of people from around the world, Italians, French, Spanish. So I still feel like I got to have the kind of, that European experience because I have just a lot of European friends in my 20s.
Yeah, well, I used to tell people that you kind of jumped hemispheres for the harvest, right? Because you'd work Southern Hemisphere in there. Fall, right? And then you come back up here and work the northern hemisphere's fall.
So technically you can do 4 harvests in a year, yeah. Because there's always the warmer location, so that like here in the northern hemisphere, Southern California has its harvest earlier than like we do up in Washington because it's colder.
Yeah.
So you can technically do 4. I've only ever managed 3 in 1 year.
Okay. Okay. Well, any highlights from working at all those fun places?
God, so many good stories. I mean, I spent a good portion of my 20s doing that, right out of college. And I had so much fun. I got to work for wineries so big, I had presses on train tracks and would move the press underneath these just massive tanks, on a choo-choo train. And then I worked at wineries so teeny tiny that, we're working with just individual barrels at a time.
Yeah.
And so everywhere in between. And I really enjoy that. I love the wine industry. And so getting to experience such a variety of it has been really cool.
So is there a big difference in like how wines are made in different countries and regions, or is it all kind of the same process? Like, is it pretty standard practice across the industry, or?
So there's definitely a lot of different stylistic choices when you get into the wine minutia of it. But I will say that a lot of practices are 1,000, 2,000 years old. They have to be, because how else are you going to do it? You know, you're squishing a grape.
Yeah, kind of the same deal.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, you are just an insanely good winemaker. You've won a couple awards, right? You got double gold at something with one of yours?
Yeah, that was our kind of our biggest, best achievement. My very first wine, which I made while moonlighting, so I was working during the day and making my own wine at night and never sleeping.
Yeah.
So, that one won an award, and that was definitely one of our big breaks. We got from Wine Press Northwest, which is a pretty cool publication up in the Pacific Northwest where I live. They gave us a double gold on it and scored it at 96, which is...
And that's your first wine that you put out.
Yes,
right?
that was what made it so special for me, was that, it really vindicated everything I've been trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible, man. So, great winemaker, but you're now learning how to be a good businessman, which is a whole different skill set, right?
Yeah, I'm a few years in, and so I feel like I'm starting to get a handle of, getting my hands on things, but certainly everything was a surprise for the first 3 years.
Right, yeah, a lot of different things coming at you, a lot of paperwork, a lot of business stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You got to pay attention to your bills and accounting and sales, and it becomes a nightmare. Well, you just want to make wine, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah, you think you're just going to make wine and sell it, and then you're like, what's the difference between excise tax and sales tax?
Right. Yeah, it becomes a thing. Yeah. Well, tell me, because the big part of your job is sales. Mm-hmm. How do you prep and get excited for sales meetings? How do you focus in on what you're going to say? What are your steps to prepping for sales? That's the big question.
That's a great question. It was so nerve-wracking at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. I remember the first meetings, the first phone calls, spending time, in the mirror, like, you can do this.
Yep.
Which is weird.
I had panic attacks the first few times I did. I was like before and after, I'm shaking because it's very nerve-wracking the first 100 times you do it.
Absolutely. And then there is kind of that trial by fire mentality the more you do it. But really, I like to have a script or some type of copy and write out kind of ahead of time what I'm going to do. Or at the very least, if I've got a big meeting that day, I'll spend half my time showering, just sitting there like, okay, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And then once you have a few key words and concepts in your mind, really from there it's pretty easy. The other thing I try to remember is to just to have fun, make it a fun conversation.
Yep.
And then the sales, think about that kind of afterward. No one's going to buy from you if they don't have a connection to you, especially in our industry. So starting out with I really like whatever's happening around you is gonna work out better for you than coming in hot with that sales pitch.
Yeah, something like wine being so subjective and how good it is, do you feel like the story is really the most important thing? I feel like every time I hear about wines, I hear a 2-minute spiel about this is an all-woman business, or refugees from Syria made it to Brazil and made this wine or something. It's always some kind of really intense emotional story to connect you to it.
Sure.
Is that really a big part of it?
Yeah. People want to know your story, and people want to have a connection to your wine beyond just it being a beverage. Getting to know you is kind of sometimes how they get to know your wine.
Yeah. Is that because wine maybe seem more a little bit of an art than anything else,
Possibly,
creative endeavor.
And I would say it's a mixture of things. Personally, I would say you get to be an artist about 0.1% of the time.
Yeah,
but
or maybe a little more romantic than
But certainly, yeah. And I will say one of the draws for me, even as a young man when I was first learning about wine, was there's a very romantic language people use around wine.
Yep.
We don't use it so much as winemakers. We kind of we feel like we've had the Band-Aid ripped off, but it still gets me. I still love how people talk about wine. It's very romantic.
Yeah. It's insane to me that you started so early in this wine journey. I mean, I remember when we were kids, you were making basement hooch before you were 16.
Yeah.
And growing vines in the backyard, which I don't think ever actually produced a grape. I mean, we were in Kansas, for Christ's sakes, but I tried hard.
So it takes like 3 years before you actually get enough fruit to do anything with. And on the third year, we had a spring freeze.
Oh, no.
And that killed the vines. But there was 3 grapevines that I experimented with. And Mom let me make basement hooch, and I did ask her about that here not too long ago. I was like, why on earth would you let, a 14-year-old kid make,
hooch
jungle punch?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it tastes like vinegar at this point.
Yeah. And she was like, oh, I knew that whatever you made wasn't going to be good enough for you to want to drink it. Yeah. She was right. Yeah. she was definitely right.
Fair. Well, back to the sales deal. You were saying in the solo part of the interview that you had a great meeting with some ladies who actually took the meeting seriously, and that's kind of an interesting point. Did you have a lot of meetings that sucked before then? People weren't really taking you seriously.
It's more just that they kind of give you. People aren't like against you. I wouldn't say, but people might just kind of barely give you the time of day.
Yeah.
They're like, well, maybe we'll have time 3 weeks from Tuesday, and you're
Gotcha.
like,
Gotcha.
So.
And these people were excited to meet you and hear about your wine and stuff like that.
Right.
Can you tell a little bit about that? I don't want you to divulge anything you're not comfortable, but who they were, or like what business they're running or anything like that?
Yeah, so they're downtown Walla Walla businesses as well, which I love supporting the local industry. So if you're down there, definitely check out. It's the olive oil shop downtown.
Okay.
It's kind of got a funny name. It's like Diolio or something like that. But that's run by Ronnie, and she's super nice. And yeah, that was the first place that carried the first wine shop that carried my wine.
Yeah.
But they also do like cookware and olive oils and all the seasonings that you could ever want. It's a fun little shop. And then right across the street is the Pasta Factory, and they also were the first restaurant to pick us up.
Nice.
So.
That's exciting. Are they reordering, or they just did their one order and sitting on it for now?
Yeah. So they're just they still have some. I went and checked on them the other day. So so they're good. But yeah, but that's definitely a part of our job too, is to keep a tabs on their sales, and so that we can be right there for reorders.
Right on. Well, I'm sure you could talk about this next question for about 4 straight hours, but can you give us the kind of condensed version of just the basics of how wine is made? I mean, I understand that you take grapes and ferment them and then wine, but what's kind of the process?
So, that's basically it. There's so many little different ways you can kind of go about doing that, but basically what we're doing is we're taking grapes and we're breaking them down in one way or another, and we're letting them be gobbled up by yeast. And yeast have this awesome habit of eating sugar. They eat the grape sugars, and they, poop out alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so we really just are taking advantage of that process. One winemaker I worked for described our job as yeast farmers.
Okay, that's pretty clever.
Yeah. But there's so many different little ways we can manipulate that process along the way, and that's kind of what makes the fun of winemaking. So like, for example, where a red gets its color and a lot of its flavor from is that we don't get rid of the skins. We let the wine sit on the grape skins, and they soak up that flavor and color and texture from the grape skins, much like a tea bag. And whereas with whites, we'll just press them right away. We just want the juice.
Yeah.
We're just converting white grape juice into alcohol.
That's
essentially it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the aging and fining process. This is just where we kind of are cleaning up the wines and making them more palatable for the customer. And it really does change things. You'd be so surprised how different a fresh wine tastes to even just a 6-month aged wine. It's apples and oranges, completely different thing.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, we just clean it up and bottle it and sell it to you.
Okay. Well, now, we talked about before that winemaking seems to be a little bit of an art, but there's a ton of science involved, too. I've been out to your tasting room. You got all kinds of chemistry kits and everything going on. Tell me a little bit about that. What are you kind of testing for the alcohol content? do you use chemicals to like manipulate the flavors or kind of boost it along in some way? What's going on there?
Yeah, so I mean, if wine's an art, then science is the easel and paints and paintbrush that we use.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just monitoring the wine. We just want to know what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
If it does everything correctly, I don't need to do anything to it. So, people talk about food chemical ads and things like that, but honestly, wine it's very natural. It's pretty much exactly what you think it is. It's boozy grapes. It's just grape booze. But there are a lot of chemicals that we can work with, most of which, again, are natural. Like I mentioned, fining, a pretty typical fining product would be some type of protein. Proteins will latch on to tannins in the wine. So that's actually why we call tannins tannins. They bind with proteins. So if we throw proteins at the wine, it will bind with the tannins, and they'll sink out of the wine. Now, which protein do you want to use? You can pretty much use anything you want. Some of the popular choices are like milk solids, egg alveum. I can never say that word right. And then there's actually a fish protein.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of interesting, yeah. But so,
but just like a protein powder, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Some other common ads would be like to add tannins, so we can just add tannins, which they get from wine.
Yeah.
The one thing you will see on a lot of bottles is contains sulfites, and that comes from the yeast naturally. Yeast actually produce sulfites, but it's also like an antioxidant, basically. It prevents the wine from oxidizing.
Okay.
So we will typically intentionally add a little sulfite to the product.
Is that sometimes people say like they get a headache from the sulfites or something like that because that's why they don't like red wine?
That you do hear that. It's actually more common in white wine. If you're sulfite sensitive, you will hear it more from white wine than red wine.
Okay.
If red wine's giving you headaches, it's because you're allergic. You have an allergic reaction, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
So many people I know are like, I can only drink a little wine because I get a headache.
Yeah,
it's an allergic reaction.
For red wine specifically, yeah, it's called. It's an allergy to transgenic amines.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
Okay.
That you can find in the red grapes, but those are pretty low populations of people. I do like to remind people there is alcohol in it. Drink carefully, drink responsibly, have some water.
Yeah. Okay. Now you have like a very different method, or maybe it's a method that's been used before, but it's an older method or something like that. You don't use the typical grape or winemaking process, right?
Yeah, for our reserve, that one double gold, we do a pretty unique process where we ferment in barrel, and I've kind of heard of this before, but when I've seen it done commercially, most people do like a barrel or two. So I was like, what would be interesting? What if we just did like all the wine fermented in barrel? So
just to be clear, your very first wine that you made, you did something ridiculous.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm following along.
Yeah. Okay. But I also, and that's why I sought out fruit on Red Mountain. I was like, well, if we're gonna do this big style, we're gonna need big fruit, and nothing in Washington really produces that kind of big fruit quite like Red Mountain does. Yeah. So I was like, this is gonna work out great, I think. And so we packed the barrels full of fruit, and then. Also, another thing that we do that's interesting, because a lot of people will just leave the barrels vertical with the fruit in it and ferment it like that. Another thing we did that was pretty interesting was we put the heads of the barrels back on and then chucked them on their side. And what that kind of does is it keeps the grapes not completely sealed off because it's a wooden barrel, but it keeps the grapes pretty well sealed off from the environment. And gives them their own little environment to live in. Mm-hmm. It also kind of helps push down what we call the cap. This is a separation between the grape skins and the liquid. Kind of keeps it submerged, but also it keeps it so that we can kind of work with it, manipulate it just by rolling the barrels.
Oh, so you're just rolling them back and forth.
Right, and we did whole berry fruit in there too. So. Another thing, I'm just maybe getting a little bit much.
No, I'm fascinated.
Another thing we talk about is maceration, which is the breakdown of the fruit. Mm-hmm. So all the maceration in the the wine we made is naturally done just by the weight and gravity of the fruit pushing on itself.
Okay.
We're not actually crushing the fruit.
It just does it on its own over a time frame.
You're right. Exactly.
That's how interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it breaks it all down, and then we roll them 2-3 times a day, kind of depending on where they're at in their life cycle. And that's what keeps our cap wet. But also, it does a pretty nice job of just preventing, because we were also doing natural fermentation along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you didn't add yeast, it's just the natural from the air?
Absolutely.
Get out, okay.
Yeah, so to help with that process, by sealing them in the barrels, it keeps kind of bad bacteria and stuff from interacting more with the wine.
Yeah. Well, so as an accountant, that seems like a dumb idea for your first wine, to like really swing for the fences like that. You should have made something that made money, and then you could experiment on your side. But you just went for it, and it worked. I mean, great. But what was that thought? Was there any thought, or you just found something and I'm going for it?
No, because there's some other styles of wine that I make that are pretty bulletproof.
Yeah.
You know, one in particular that I know is not only bulletproof, meaning that it'll make the wine for sure without any problems. It's also a highly award-winning style of winemaking, because I've learned it from some pretty well-awarded wineries. But for some reason, this just really reached out to me. And also, there is some kind of old schoolness to what we're doing. This has probably been done by French people 1,000 years ago. You know, we use stainless steel now out of convenience, but of course, they would have used oak barrels, you know, even just a couple hundred years ago. So there's kind of this matching of old school and new school, and I really, everything sort of clicked in my mind.
Is that what you think really drew you to wine in general? Was just sort of maybe like the romantic history portion of it, all the, I mean, wine has been a foundation of, humanity since, when we were cavemen coming up. That's when I think we settled, was when we could finally make beer and wine. Mm-hmm. So do you think that's what drew you to the whole thing?
Partly for sure, but I really had a love for food chemistry, and and wine is I think the most exciting one. Yeah. Like, I love all the other industries. I've gotten to make beer and spirits and stuff like that, but wine to me is so exciting because it's one, you get one shot. You get to work with this block from this vineyard, and this year you get one try at that. Mm-hmm. You'll never get to try that again. And so there's also this kind of high level of excitement with the industry. But for sure, the history really brought me into it as well, because I didn't have a huge food outlet for food chemistry as a kid. Good Eats on the Food Network was about the best thing that I had to
Mom
learn
Mom wasn't experimenting in the kitchen. She was working a job, and then just whatever we got.
Yeah. There was no nitroglycerin, foam or whatever. Nitroglycerin. No, what's the
nitroglycerin foam?
We're
blowing stuff up.
No, I can't think of it now.
I don't know.
The cryo.
Every fancy restaurant I've been to sure has a lot of foam, though.
Yes, they do.
They like foam. Nitrous oxide, right? Or
no, that's the laughing gas.
Isn't that what they put in the foam?
Yeah.
Anyway. Liquid nitrogen.
Thank you. Why am I being dumb? Yeah.
I got you. All right. Walk me through a little bit of the grape growing process, if you can. I mean, again, I'm sure you could talk for hours about it, but the only thing I know is that grapes are supposed to struggle a little because that's what makes them flavorful, but I have no idea what that actually means.
Well, so, and this is also kind of leans on a question I get a lot, which is why do wines cost more or less than one another? So a grapevine, naturally, like if we grow it without cutting back at all, it'll try and throw about 18 tons to the acre of fruit, which is way more than it can support in terms of quality wine fruit. Okay,
back that up just a little bit, just so I'm clear. You measure it per acre and how much weight of fruit that it produces? Is
Correct.
That right?
Yeah.
So you said 18 tons per acre.
Right.
That's too much?
So that's if we didn't cut back, if we didn't thin out the clusters at all. Uh-huh. Or flowers, or however you're doing it. It would throw 18 tons to the acre, but the fruit quality would be garbage. You wouldn't hardly be able to make wine out of it.
Yeah,
especially a wine that will stand the test of time, because you need a certain amount of alcohol and protection to that wine. And that comes from getting more quality grapes. This is why, like, a lot of the really fancy old school wines have been able to last decades and you can still drink them, is because they come from very specific years where they got all the good stuff, just the right amount of alcohol and acid and tannins to protect that wine and keep it for so long. And so you want that. In order to boost that, you can thin the grapes. You can reduce the amount of crop per acre.
Okay.
So a really a really like volume production would probably tailor that by half. You'd be about 9 tons to the acre.
Okay. For a large operation.
For your cheap box wine, you're looking at 9 tons to the acre.
Okay.
And then you get more quality the further you go down, and so 6 is probably closer to like average of what you would expect. But the really premium wineries and like where our reserve comes from is 3 tons to the acre.
Really?
So from 18 to 3 tons is
so really that's why it's so much more expensive. They literally grow less grapes.
Right. So that doubles the price.
That's wild to me. So what is the process of growing these vines? I mean, first, just to plant a vine, it takes 3 years for them to actually produce fruit, right? And then, but it's really 10 or 20 years before they're any good, or?
Right. After 3 years, you'll start selling the fruit, but you're going to sell it at a much lower cost. So you're looking at, a couple $1,000s per ton as opposed to several $1,000s per ton. And then, as the vineyard gets into more maturity, you can demand a little more money for that.
That's wild to me. So how do they, when they say make them struggle, do they just try to keep the water content low a little bit?
That's a big...
Produces more sugars, that kind of thing?
That's a big thing for sure. Regulated deficient irrigation is what we call it, and it's just slowly tapering off the amount of water we give it as the vine gets closer to harvest. And that a lot of that work came out of Washington State from... I think the guy's name is Marcus Keller.
Which is where you went to school,
I got to meet him once. Pretty cool.
Oh, okay. All right. Feather in the cap.
Right. But he basically wrote the book on that. But of course, if you look at the classic vineyards too, they try and plant them in places where they get naturally the right amount of rainfall.
Yeah. But that's why they always do them on like slopes and stuff too, right?
That actually has more to do with like soil holding capacity and stuff. Okay. So... at the bottom, you're going to have you have 100 feet of loam, healthy, high nitrogen soil.
Oh, is that what loam is? Okay.
Good soil. And the plant is going to just take off like a weed. But we don't really necessarily want good vegetative growth. We want good reproductive growth, because that's what a berry essentially is. So you can kind of trick the vine into doing that by making it think that the season is going to end sooner. So once you kind of get through the vegetative cycle, you start tapering off the water, or maybe it has limited access to nutrients, or it's just got a short soil, and so it gets stopped by some kind of hard pan. That can kind of push the vine more towards from vegetative state to a maturation state.
Yeah. That's wild to me. So how many types of grapes are there that make wine? Like, is it just thousands, or is there just like a couple like real strong?
There's kind of like the main 10.
Yeah.
I mean, there are like technically hundreds, especially if you can include in like all the modern crosses, but most people don't. Mostly what we're looking at is Vitis vinifera, branch of family kind of
That's
grapes.
The Latin name for it?
Yeah.
Say it one more time.
Vitis vinifera.
Okay.
Which just means winemaking grapes, basically.
Which are wildly different from like the grapes I eat at the grocery store.
Yes, those are American grapes, actually.
Okay.
Interestingly, we have grapes on both sides of the pond.
Yeah.
But they're very different species. They've been separated so long.
Gotcha.
And all of most of the wines that make it to market all come from the European tradition.
Yeah, of these like basic 10 different ones.
Yeah, I mean, and also I would say that there's like sort of subclasses, so there's different species within those. Like there's a few different clones of Cab, a few different clones of Syrah, but for the most part, you're looking at about 10 kind of big wines that you see on every grocery store shelf. The 5 reds and 5 whites that you've seen on every menu ever. But interestingly, there's just so many. Every time a grape crosses, much like a tree, it makes a whole new thing every time. So every seed in and of itself would be a different kind of grape.
Yeah.
Would produce a different kind of grape.
So all these grapes kind of come from the old world, and they were brought over to here.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You were telling me a fascinating story one time about how like the original vines were maybe from like Syria or something like that.
Northern Syria is the most likely candidate at the moment.
Can you lay a little bit of that on us?
Yeah, it's just that's probably or most likely where they were from. It's hard to say, but that just comes from genetic research, and how far back they can date it. But obviously, they must have been around some time ago, like very long ago, because we have them here in America too.
Right.
So how do they make that jump? Different theories, different ideas, but they must have been around for a very, very long time. But likely, they were present in northern Syria, Fertile Crescent, Bible times. That's probably where the wine.
That's where
the
wine
initial wines
kind
of came from. Yeah.
That's crazy. Crazy to me. Do you have a favorite varietal that you either as a consumer or as a winemaker?
The issue is that it's when you're in the industry you like everything.
Yeah.
Everything's pretty exciting. It's always fun to try something new for sure. But I do have some top contenders. When I first got into this industry, I thought I'm going to be some kind of hipster guy. I'm going to go live up in the mountains and make my Pinot Noir, and no one's ever going to talk to me ever again. Yeah. And then I went and worked for
I feel like every young man has that escape from reality dream.
Yeah. And then I went and worked for big Napa cab wine houses that are famous for their cab, and so I took a total different turn there. But definitely, the major wines that you're familiar with are all kind of my favorites. But I love a good. The first wine we made is a Bordeaux style blend, and I'd say that's a top contender for my favorite.
And Bordeaux is a region in France or a city in France?
It's both, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so they name the wines from there. You have to get the grape varietals from the Bordeaux region, and the style of winemaking's from.
It doesn't make quite as much sense to our modern brains, for branding, to do it like that. But back in the day, that's how they branded everything. You just bought wine from Burgundy. You weren't buying a Pinot Noir. You were buying just wine from Burgundy.
I gotcha.
And it just so happens that all the grapes in Burgundy are Pinot Noir. So if you're buying a Burgundy, you're buying Pinot Noir.
Gotcha.
And similarly with Bordeaux, there is the right bank, left bank situation. So if you buy a Bordeaux, you're either buying Cab or Merlot. But all Bordeaux blends are a blend of Cab and Merlot. Mm-hmm. So, that's what you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about kind of flipping the script here, or moving to a different direction. What is a tasting room? You're opening a tasting room. I mean, it's just a bar, or there's a difference?
I mean, sort of. It's a fancy bar.
Yeah.
But really, we're only licensed to pour and sell our house wines.
So only the wines that you have are you allowed to sell there? You can't go out and raid the liquor store and then have a bunch of stuff going on?
No, you need a completely different liquor license for that. And then also the alcohol control boards are interested in knowing if you own both production and end of sales. So I think there might be some issue if you own a winery and a grocery store and you sell that wine to your grocery store.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they really don't like that situation for some reason.
Yeah, well, you got different corporations maybe.
I'm not really sure how it works or if they'll even let you do it, but they were concerned with that.
When I come into a tasting, what can I expect?
So it's really just kind of meant to be a fun and inviting environment. So when you come in, you definitely expect to meet me and any staff I have on that day, and you get to try all of our wines. You get to kind of just relax in a nice setting. We also have games and music going and kind of try to make it fun, but it really is just a communal place to come and take a load off for a little while and have a good conversation and enjoy your life. And
where you're at, there's a bunch of tasting rooms, right? So do people kind of make that's a day of tastings? They go to 5 or 6 different places?
Typically, yeah. Actually, that's about exactly how much they go to. Is between 4 and 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And for sure, yeah, there's quite a few like wine tour companies in our area that'll take you around, and or a lot of people like to come to Walla Walla and just hang out downtown, which is where our winery is. And yeah, usually people, they have a nice lunch and then they do some wine tasting and spend the day kind of wandering around the shops and enjoying wine, and then all of a sudden, it's dinner time.
So 4 to 6. Do most people, are they fully consuming the wine, or I've seen people like spit into deals? I feel like, you have like a glass of wine, or even a little more than a glass of wine at each place. By the 6th one, you might be hammered.
Yeah, it's usually 1 to 2 ounce pours, and so you're not really expected to drink the whole thing. Some people do, some people don't. It just it depends on the vibe, really.
Yeah. Whether it's an actual tasting or a bachelorette party, one or the other.
Yeah, if it's a bachelorette party, usually they're drinking them.
Okay.
And if it's, a wine publication, then they want to be really accurate. And we get all types. I've definitely seen the kind of party goers tasting right next to a guy who's got his notebook out and taking it very seriously. So I think it's a part of what makes the industry fun too, is the variety of people you get to interact with.
Yeah. Are you guys doing food at your tasting room?
We're going to do a limited menu for the time being. That's because too we want to allow people to bring their dogs in. So if we do a full kitchen, we got to say no to the dogs, which I'm not about that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So we can do limited menu, prepackaged foods. We're going to do some charcuteries and snacks. So.
Yeah. Well, you took me to dinner one time, and it was the most fascinating experience. You had this big, dry red wine. I took a sip, and I go, that is garbage. Please don't ever serve me something like that again. And you were like, just pause. Mm-hmm. And then I had a bite of my steak, and then I had the wine, and I was like, well, now that's delicious. What happens there? Is there there's some change to the taste buds, or
absolutely?
It was the most fascinating thing.
Basic tasting theory is that we want the wine and food to complement each other. Mm-hmm. So just really basically the reason why that one in particular works is that the acid in the wine cuts through the fat in the steak. Right, so you have this kind of fatty, acidy thing. Think of salt and vinegar chips.
Yeah.
How they kind of balance each other. And then the other big one is the one I was telling you earlier, is that the tannins in the red wine, that was the thing that was making your mouth feel full and like it was too bold of a wine, will bind with proteins. And your steak is full of proteins.
Yeah.
So they complement each other in that, when your mouth is full of proteiny fattiness, as soon as you take the sip of that wine, it's going to rinse your palate clean again, and you'll want to eat more. So that's wild. So the best pairings are always ones that when you eat something, it makes you want to drink more. When you drink something, it makes you want to eat more.
Okay, I gotcha. And there are the sommeliers at the fancy restaurant. There's the ones that kind of pick that, right? How that works.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are they looking for? Just acid and fat, and what all goes on in that pairing minutia?
That was very basic pairings ideas. When you get to that level, I think they're really going to the next step, and they're thinking, okay, not only about the chemistry, but what flavors here, what flavor profile do I want to put with this dish so that it makes the dish and the wine even better.
Yeah.
So they're kind of taking that next step of ooh, this has apple notes. Ooh, this has caramel notes. Caramel apple. You know, you get that kind of synergy going.
Oh, okay. That's incredible to me. Mm-hmm. And then the rules of wine are kind of different with the food pairings, right? I know white is with fish and red with steak, but there's a bunch of rules.
So there's no rules. That's the one thing I always like to remind people is that, because people will ask me too, how do I know if a wine is good? Mm-hmm. And it's just, well, if you put it in your mouth and it tastes good, it's good wine. Yeah. That's all you got to do. Is just try it and see if you like it. And if it's a cheap wine, guess what? You're a cheap date. Great. Yeah. That's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. So really, now I forgot where I was going. What were we talking about?
Food and wine pairings.
Okay. No, I forgot it already.
No worries, man. We were talking a little bit about how I said whites pair with fish and reds pair with steaks, and there was a bunch of rules, but you said no rules.
Oh yeah, no rules. So and you're supposed to enjoy the wine.
Mm-hmm. That's really the only rule.
That's really the only rule. And then everything else is just a guideline. It's just a way to help you find those pairings a little easier. You know, when you read in the Wine Spectator and they're saying like, hey, put this with this or that with that. They're just trying to help you so that you can get to the enjoyment faster. Mm-hmm. You know.
Yeah. Well, when you kind of first started your business, excuse me, it's starting to kill me talking too much. When you first started your business, you really didn't have much of a plan.
That's correct.
And we were trying to help you out, but you also kind of had to do it on your own a little bit. But now that we've started the tasting room, that you've kind of got that going, you really seem to have planned it out. So my question for you is, how much easier was it now that you had all your ducks in a row and were making plans rather than just sort of winging it?
The plans definitely help, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There's nothing I can say other than like duh-doy. But the other thing that's a little different too that I've realized is that I need to check in with my business every day. Mm-hmm. And that actually brings a level of reassurance that has far exceeded anything else I've done for the business.
Yeah, just being there every day.
Just, even if it's just deleting one email, the fact that you brought up that email and looked at it and then deleted it is like, okay, well now I know I don't have anything to worry about in that email box.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for you, man. Any final thoughts on the wine industry as a whole or something you'd like to share?
Come try Washington Wines.
Yeah.
We make good wines.
Okay.
You'll like them.
Yeah, in Washington?
In Washington. Probably in Walla Walla.
Yeah. Yeah. Walla Walla, the wine town. It's a good place to go if you like wine.
It is great, yeah. I get bonus points just from being there, which is great.
So one more time, they can find you at turtlewines.com
Mm-hmm.
and then at Turtle Wine or Turtle Winery on Facebook and Instagram.
Yep.
And you're at Tasting Rooms in Walla Walla. What's the address?
Walla Walla, Washington. 315 East Main Street.
East Main Street. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on here, man. I was excited to learn a little bit more about wines.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man.
Congratulations on the podcast. It's great.
Exciting. It's kind of fun. So, all right, man. That's it.